Welcome to the Deconstructing Data podcast and live stream. I'm Jessie Lezak, fractional CMO at BDEX, along with David Finkelstein, founder and CEO of BDEX. What's new, David? Can you hear me okay?
I hear you. I hear you loud and clear, Jessie. I'm doing well. It looks like we're doing another coffee shop live, which is cool.
Yes.
Yes, nice. I'm excited about our guest today. It's another great one. So happy to jump right in.
Awesome. Well, let's do it. Because today on Deconstructing Data, we're thrilled to welcome Eli Goodman. He is the CEO and founder at Datos, and that's an Semrush company. Welcome to the show, Eli.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Good to see you both.
Yeah, absolutely, Eli. We're excited to have you on the show today. And we'd love to have you kick it off for us in case we have listeners and viewers who don't know much about you or Datos. I'd love for you to give everybody a little bit of background about yourself and what led you to build Datos and what you guys are doing today.
Sure. My favorite subject. Let me talk about myself for a minute. Listen, we all are derivative of a lot of things in our lives that come before us. But going back 25 years, I just fell. It was like the late 90s, and the internet was a thing, and I kind of fell backwards into the data business. I love math, and I got a job at Gartner. Like a big tech research company. Certainly at the time, was very very exciting for me. But like, all things being equal, that was the biggest company I ever worked at, right? Like that was early internet. And like from there, I began to go smaller and smaller places that were like 300 people, 100 people, 5 of us around a table, and then growing and selling the company. So eventually to where it was COVID, right? My last company had just we had gone through an acquisition, and that had kind of ended right at the end of literally January 2020. And it was March 2020, and I was about to join an organization to like build out a new thing. And the night before we were signing, all the papers, Trump shut down all flights from Europe. This was mid-March, right, 2020. And at that point, the entire world went into a freeze. And I'm sure everybody here is very familiar with what happened. So at that point, I was just on the couch, right? So chilling. They're like, okay, what are we going to do? And I ended up, just by complete happenstance, met my co-founders, Serge and Stan. They reach out to me over LinkedIn, right? They're based in Germany, and we're like, hey, we're thinking about getting in the data business. You're here, you're in the data business. And we got together, and it suddenly just kind of clicked, like better lucky than smart, I think, on a variety of things. And then we also had in common amongst us at the time was Semrush, right? Like I have known them for many years at an executive level, and they independently had a relationship with them. And the 3 of us got together with Semrush, and they ended up seeding us, right? Like, I CEO, and then, Serge and Stan with me, and we founded the company, and we were off to the races. That was like, mid 2020. So that's what led me there, right? Like there are any number of things that got us there, but I would say from a pure data perspective, which is what we're going to talk about today, I love consumer data. I love data as ingredients, right? Like thinking about I'm in the sugar business, and I like to sell data to people that bake cakes. And that was really like our initial thought around Datos and Clickstream in particular, which is, again, something near and dear to me for a long time. And I just believe it's incredibly powerful. So all of that is what led to Datos. And then certainly from there, as you see, we are a Semrush company. We sold majority interest in late 2023. And still 5 years later, continue to rock out. So it's a great story, like, from a founding, and I still do love what it is we do. And I'm happy to talk about all of it today.
Wow, that's an amazing journey to actually start a company with a couple of co-founders that, you just sort of met on LinkedIn. So
we didn't even meet in person for 18 months. Like it was it was from the couch, like literally like put up millions of dollars in revenue, sitting on my couch in Brooklyn during COVID, just with a headset and my computer in front of me. And then we finally got together the first time that we met. And then we'll move on to the reason people are here, not just all the human interest, but the first time that we met in person, we linked up there in Dusseldorf in Germany. So I fly into Frankfurt, and we spent a week together. And this was like 3 days before Christmas or so, or whatever, a week before Christmas, I was flying back home. and I popped a positive COVID test at the airport. This is when they would not let you into the country. It was pretty hectic. And I ended up, I had to spend a week at the airport Marriott in Frankfurt with COVID. It's asymptomatic, by the way. I just had to sit there, but did make it home in time. It was like a planes, trains, and automobiles, but made it home in time, like literally Christmas Eve. It was pretty wild.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. Yeah, I've heard lots of stories of people that got stranded places during those times. That's terrible. Well, let's jump right into our topics. I wanted to let you sort of kick this one off. Dirty data is something that we talk about a lot. We always talk about the importance of data quality. And so let's have you kick this one off, undermining AI model accuracy.
Yeah, listen, I talk about this every day, right? And I say this even before I get into AI model accuracy, even further up funnel. How does data become dirty, right? And I think that is one of the most important questions as a data provider. Again, at Datos, we have a panel of 20 million people worldwide, and we build product off of their anonymized clickstream. Is the number one question should always be, where does your data come from and why is it trustworthy? How did you gather it, right? Is it cookie based? Is it human based? Is it bot based? Is it scraping? There's a million different ways to be able to gather up data in a compliant fashion. So that's the first one. And I would say, so then if I move that into dirty data related to AI model accuracy, you want to know the big thing, right? That many people will miss. There's a big difference between how bots and web scrapers and crawlers gather data and what they do on the internet in order just to get stuff versus what we do, which is passively observe human beings and what they do. And it's incredibly fascinating. I think we're all familiar. Let's talk AI search would be a perfect example. That's a big thing for us and Semrush and a variety of companies that exist out there. And the entire world is falling all over themselves in order to position themselves for the next big battle of the century. And the way that in order to be able to currently gather up intelligence at scale, most everybody, what they need to do, right, is that they send out bots and they tap the APIs and are running hundreds of millions or billions of searches, right, on ChatGPT and Perplexity and whatnot, and then having like a bot conversation with the LLM, and that is then gathering up, right, intelligence on what are the responses like, and what is the conversation, and where does it go, and what are the citations, and what are the rankings, and what are the volumes, all of which is awesome. You need that in order to build out tools. But problem is that if you just rely on that data, human beings are using LLMs in an incredibly different fashion, right? The bots are out there gathering up data related to brands and shopping and retail and the things that basically people advertise against and sell and make money with. But over 90+% of all of the LLM searches right now across the globe are productivity based or improvement based. People are loading things up to improve this PowerPoint or help me address something. Or they have e-girlfriends for all I know. People doing crazy things. But
e-doctors too.
Right. That's what I'm saying. It's wild. What it is that people are doing. It's really fascinating. But what I'm getting at is you really need to have a mixed, call it a variable input model here of you need scale of data for brands and whether it be branded or generic shopping terms, et cetera. That's where e-commerce or that's where the money is going to come from. But you also need to better understand that that's not how humans are. They're not doing it at scale right now that everybody's jumping on and saying, what are the best Nike shoes for somebody of my size and weight, right? That's much more, it's rare so far. It just hasn't reached that type of scale. So all of that is to say is that if you're basing your decision-making off of one thing, right, you may miss out on a variety of others. So this is what I'm getting at from dirty data can undermine. It's not only about you got to know the provenance of where it's coming from, right? Because again, bots and humans are very different. But then what is it that you really want to get out of, right? Because there's the obvious quantitative, I count things and I just want to make sure I'm showing up. But there's the qualitative or almost the philosophical, which is what is the spirit of what somebody's after, the intent, and that could get lost if you're just using tools that are purely bot based.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk to us about how do you, and what's your approach to that? What's your approach to sort of taking on that challenge?
Yeah, so let's say, remember, I am in the data sales business, right? Going back to my metaphor, I am sugar and I'm baking cake. So we actually, license data in a variety of capacities to any number of, AI developers, whether it be AI companies or AI developers that work at companies that are building something. So the first things first, that's why we are very transparent about what we are and what we aren't, right? And I think that that's a very important factor, is as many of the underlying metrics that you could share, right? Or as in, if you're a buyer, that you could ask about related to the data sets, will be able to help your data scientists better understand your developers. What's the denominator that we're working with here, right? Is it a representative sample of a population that I'm after? Is it passively observed? Is it objectively observed? Is it a subjective sample? These are all classic market research terms. But that's the first one. Is, for us, I like to call, we 8 Mile our clients, right? If you've ever seen the movie and the final rap battle, we like to come out of the gate and talk about everything that we're great at and everything about our data, but also everything that we aren't, and things you shouldn't use the data for, and also ways with which that you want to prevent somebody misreading the data, right? So if you're a data seller, you better know what you're doing, and you have to know where the peccadillos, where the wrinkles are related to your data. And I'll give you an example, right, of one, that's a very important one. If you just look at URL sequencing, particularly in LLMs, is the way that when you have a conversation with again, with Perplexity, it's different than it is with ChatGPT about like how those websites resolve themselves. And every single time, like if you go to Perplexity and you type in and you ask a question, every single time that you have a ping in that conversation is that they respond to you, and then you respond to them like you're having a conversation with the LLM. The URL refreshes, right? So it looks like you're asking the exact same question 10, 20, 50 times, depending on how deep you go. But the timestamps are different when you're analyzing the data. Like, again, we go through aggregated, but you look at it in the back office. And if you don't know that, if you just look at the data and your model is like, well, it just looks like that's just, people are just asking the same question over and over again, you're going to make an assumption, you're going to make a technical assumption or an interpretation that is way off base, right? So that's just one very specific example about, but is like something that could go awry. And the moment that starts to snowball, it becomes a bigger problem. So if you're buying data or selling data, you want to make sure that like you just ask the questions. And if you're selling it, you got to make sure that you are well aware of all of those little wrinkles that your data is going to have, or you're not going to be in a good position to be able to direct people on how to get the best use of it.
That's a good point. I've seen a lot of instances where people obtain a data set and make certain assumptions about that data set without truly understanding how that data set was derived. And so to your point, you're making an assumption. If you're just looking at the data and you're seeing a URL refresh, it kind of looks like the user went and asked the same question over and over again, or whatever it is. Or went to the same website over and over again. And now you're thinking, okay, well, there's some major intent there. They've gone to this website, 20 times when they really were at the website once, right? And so fully understanding the data that's coming in and how it's been derived rather than making assumptions is extremely important. And I've seen that across all kinds of data.
Yeah, and I think, absolutely. That's what I'm saying. This is just one of like an unlimited number of permutations that we could talk about. And, I'll say this, right, from both a buyer and a seller perspective on such a thing, is it's sort of like, and forgive me, I believe that this is what it is, like the great filter, if it is, I think of the Fermi paradox, is that, you need to have things with which that you as a buyer or seller that are, you basically put somebody to the test. And an example on my end, and to make sure that they're bona fide, is my point, you put them to the test. And on my end, like one of those things is, because everything that we do is big data, so we deliver through the cloud, like AWS and S3 credentials and things like that, is if you send somebody over S3 credentials and they're like, I don't know what this is, I don't know how to deal with this, that's probably a pretty good indicator that this is not the person that's going to be building the AI model and knows what to do. So my recommendation that, again, for the For the buyers, right, is you need to figure out like how are you going to put these companies to the test, right? Of I need to filter out like the players from the pretenders, and not only who do I trust, which I believe we're going to talk about some of that later on, during this session, but like you also, what matters to you doesn't necessarily matter to your neighbor or to your competitor. So that's what I also recommend. Like again, it's just we have a few things that I'll be like, well, this is how we're going to flesh somebody out to make sure before we go through the entire thing. And at the end, they're like, so what's clickstream? And I'm like, okay, we missed that, right? Like that was a problem, right? If I sell clickstream. So again, I think that that's important on both sides of any transaction. I recommend for everybody, again, so we're talking about dirty data. You got to know like what your lines are, because also data can be dirty and not be dirty data. Like to be clear, like some people are very good at cleansing and prepping and transforming. So maybe that's how you want it as raw as possible. So I wouldn't mistake dirty data and bad data. Those terms could be used interchangeably depending upon who you are. That's why I'm saying like you and you and you should all have your own way to filter the data themselves and the sellers and the buyers.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And I'll give you another example. So in our space, in the identity world, we see a lot of companies that are buying identity data from providers, and they come to us and they say, why are we having such bad performance? And we look at the data that they're buying, and we do some analysis, and we find, well, wait a second, you have, Eli, and you have this ID that's linked to Eli, but you also have this other ID, and for some reason you have these 10 other IDs linked to Eli, and they're making, again, going back to the assumptions, they're making the assumption that their data provider is giving them this data, so it must be good, and they don't have all the context behind it to understand that some of that data is actually derived from bots or some other
Right.
sort of ad fraud. And so when we apply some of the technology that we have that removes IDs linked to bots and click farms and all that stuff, we're able to say, hey, look, out of the 15 IDs you have for Eli, actually only 2 of them are actually valid. And this is his phone and this is his iPad or whatever it is. And all the rest, they're all bots. And once you sort of get sort of the context and you realize that you can't just accept the data that's coming in, you have to understand where it's coming from and what sort of filters need to be placed on it, then only then can you actually clean the data and be using data more efficiently. And to tie that into our next topic about the hidden impact of bad data, bias, and cost, that really, for us, we see that a lot of times that there's companies that are doing these things. They don't understand what it's really costing them and what the impact is to having that bad data. So I'm going to let you further expand on that, but that's some of the experience that we've seen in the identity space.
Yeah, I mean, the hidden cost. I mean, there's the actual cost. Right? Like I blew millions of dollars, right? The sheer amount of money that is caught up in all of this, whether it be venture capital or whoever, like on all sides of these transactions here, it's mind-boggling. So the first one from the hidden impact of the bad data here is a personnel problem, right? And I feel that one of the things that we all suffer from is this college is called like the AI idea here. It's new, right? Like it's relatively new. And how do you go about judging somebody that is sitting in front of you and interviewing and like what they're able to promise you? How do you check their work if you don't know? And so that's the first one, is that if all of the money that we all spend for like sourcing and hiring and retention and so on and so forth, equity, like all these different things, that's the first one. When I think about like the impact of bad data, it's really about starting with, do I even have the personnel to be able to figure out if the data is good or bad, right? So think about that cost, about you get what you pay for, so that before you've even gotten the data in-house, right? Like there's a potential cost issue. And then let's assume for a minute that you have people that know what they're doing, right? Or at least understand to do what they're doing. Is the data everybody uses is so big. Like probably the number one thing that still blows my hair back on a monthly basis is the size of the cloud computing bill, right? You cannot get your head around like when you really start diving into these data sets and how rich and expansive they are about the processing costs. And if you are not prepared for that, that will just roll over to a point that I mean, it's like shopping, right? Like, like our P&L, when that first began to happen, just like the terabytes and terabytes of data, that we are gathering up. And in our universe, every day we have to hang on to all of that data, forever, right? That's the purpose, right? We have 5 years of data and we continue to grow. So that's a second piece that I think when you talk about bad data is, are you buying and you have to then hang on to and process and sort through what that looks like. It just, again, as the non-tech professional here, well, tech professional, I guess, but like not the data scientist, right? So I just see like the bills. So it's a constant, it's a constant set of how do we optimize this? And the team is really good at that, right? They figure out how to be able to do better, be more efficient, et cetera. So personnel, cloud computing, and that's by the time you even get to the data, and then suddenly, you start building something that is being held up by like toothpicks and gum, right? I guess at least metaphorically. And the more and more you stack on top of that, the harder and harder it's going to be to, one, have all of that be stable, but also if you need to change something out in the future, how are you going to do that without the entire thing falling, right? It just becomes like another addition on the house, and so on and so forth. So I guess that's the other thing where I am a measure twice and cut once person, and that's certainly, if you asked my team, I have like my Eli-isms that they'll joke with me about. That's one of them, right? That I will constantly talk about is I would rather us. Do you want it fast? Do you want it right? It generally tends to not be both, right? So you better pick which one you're going to go for, and I would rather be right than fast just for the sake of it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always that risk of doing fast and not looking at all of the issues that are developed from doing it so fast. And I think a good one, to your point, is the cost of storing all of that data. If you rush to it and you don't know what you're getting into, you're not calculating ahead of time, what is this going to cost me? Then all of a sudden you end up with an AWS bill that's going through the roof, right?
Right. And let's even talk about changeover costs, right? Like, let's say you get it wrong, right? So you talk about the impact of bad data. It's not as if it's all commodities. You're like, oh, I got that data here and now I'll just get it here and I'll just swap them out, right? Like, think about how expensive that is in order to do that in a way that you don't have to take the entire thing offline and then be able to replace. It's bananas, right? Like about how much money could be wasted with all of that. And that could be the end. I mean, that could literally be the end of your money and you never get there. And then I think that that's another thing, right, is, in the end, and this is certainly the way that we look at it, is, I'll talk to clients and, when you're negotiating and, probably maybe this doesn't always serve me well in the shorter term, but the longer term, I could tell you is the partnership act tactic of this is I tell them, I said, it's not the first contract I'm worried about, it's the next 10, right? Like it's when you're talking about data, particularly that's going to feed into whether it be AI modeling or things you're building your entire business off of, it's a long-term relationship, right? You don't get into that just because, hi, I saw you at a bar and now we're married forever, right? Everybody should take the time to be able to be very diligent about like what it is that we're doing and what we're planning for, and the right data providers as well as the right data buyers, that we all understand like what everybody needs out of this, right? So if you start to feel that your data provider doesn't have your long-term interest at heart, they're just like must sign contract, make end of year, which is we all have to do that, like welcome to the world of business. But if you're not sensing that they really are thinking about like, you plant a tree not based on what it looks like today, but what it's going to look like in 10 years, right? That's the nature of things. That's sort of the philosophy of, I'm here in New York City, how Central Park was built. Like that's how it was designed. And I'm a big believer in it, right? So that's another thing when you talk about the change costs of what it would take. And then imagine you miss it the second time. Like, happens all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm a big proponent of growing with your customers as well. So like we like to build relationships with our customers and grow with them. We're not, into the sort of churn and burn like so many companies are. And a lot of times, we'll hear that from customers as we're talking to them. They'll be like, yeah, we signed this big contract and we're working with this company, but they don't seem to care about us. And we have this problem. Can you solve it for us? And so we love to solve problems for our clients. That's a game changer when you can solve a problem for your client, and build that relationship. You're doing it for the long haul.
Yeah, I think no question. I mean, that's definitely our jam, right? Like, still here, started a company, still here 5 years later. Like, that doesn't happen all the time. And
Sure.
but again, that type of that tactic, is built over decades, right? Like, it's not easy, right? In order to
Yep.
stay the course with that sometimes, right? Like, that's any of us. So anyway, I just going back to our bias and cost hidden impact here when we talk about this particular topic is bad data, the wrong data, it costs you more, could cost you everything if depending upon how important it is to like what you have going on. So don't take it lightly. Whether it be hire the right people, pay the money, you get what you pay for, right? Like, things are expensive, yes.
Yeah.
Like, that's the nature of it. Now, that doesn't mean you get raked over the coals. Like, be appropriate on it. I don't mean it like that, but I just mean it as, if it comes down to that, you're like, these data sets are very different, but one costs X and one costs Y. You should ask yourself why that is, right? And that's also an important factor, when it comes to things. So just another way to be able to layer it.
Yeah, this has been a really rich conversation. There's been some really good topics that have come up. I don't know if we've talked about. I loved what you guys were saying on the previous topic about making sure when you're purchasing data that you're understanding how it was collected. We don't talk about that very often, but taking me back to my master's in sociology days, and we had to really go out and be diligent about how we were collecting data. And it's such an important part of the whole scientific process that I think it's really great that you both shed light on that. And we've talked a lot about bad data, but we should transition now to our third topic about data quality. So quality data, and I know this is something we talk about a lot, David, but in particular, Eli, could you kick us off on data quality with protecting revenue and customer trust?
Yeah, so the first things first, right, from, when we'll talk about from a data quality perspective is you have to know, let's say as a data seller, you have to know what you have, right? So that you can, accurately Sherpa your clients through what they need to do to be able to take advantage of it, to be able to capitalize, because I think that's oftentimes is that you start with data gets sent over. And if it is not parsed and organized and categorized in whatever fashion that it needs to, it sits on a shelf and money gets lost. And then suddenly you're not in a position to be able to renew. They think that you pulled one over on them, and that's not necessarily how it went. So the first things first is I recommend if you are in the big data business, and I say as both a buyer and a seller, you have got to be able to assign resources in order to support and nurture that relationship. It doesn't happen because you just turned on a fire hose and walked away. You need to have an apparatus, and this goes back to even the cost that we talked about, is every dollar that you spend on senior people that know how to be able to navigate, let's just call it the potential pitfalls, of buying data these days, buying and selling data, it's going to pay off exponentially down the line. So you're not just selling the data. You don't necessarily want to be in a services business either. The margin on that is pretty light. But you really need to know that, if you send something over that's incredibly complex, these are terabytes upon terabytes of information, that you're going to be in a position to be able to help service them as they go, answer their questions, have some ideas, be creative, be proactive. I think that is probably one of the number one things. And I think about this all the time. I was interviewing a guy earlier today, and one of the discussions was about, when we hire people, do you hire somebody, and I have everybody in the world I feel like falls into one or two buckets. Are they stereo instructions or are they mumblecore? And how I define that is that, and both of these are great people. You just got to make sure they're in the right place. Stereo instructions people are ones you hire and you have a very well-defined playbook and say, pull this lever, push this button, do it in this order, follow this script, and they will be successful. That is how they work, and they are awesome at that, right? And there are any number of roles out there in the world that you need to be able to do that, and that certainly plays, right? When it comes to, because we're talking about customer trust, you need people that understand, like when a client says X, you do Y. Mumblecore is an improvisational filmmaking technique that, the director and all this shorthanded basically gives the actors the general high notes of what needs to be accomplished in a particular scene, and then lets them riff, like lets them freestyle. And if you have the right people to be able to do that, they can make magic. And that's certainly also very important in this data landscape, is you don't necessarily know what's going to happen, right? Data changes, data's different, things, AWS goes down, et cetera. So I say all of this is that I also am a believer that in order for data quality, is in not only like handling and managing the data, but then how to be able to handle those ongoing problems. My high recommendation is that you have both stereo instructions and Mumblecore together in order to be able to address not only the data handling and the data delivery, but then the fulfillment on the other side, and then what you should do with it. Because you need to have imagination.
Yeah, it's true. It's a good point. And your people, right? Your people generate that customer trust. 100%. A combination of people and processes, right? But without the right people in place as well, you can't. Somebody has to be communicating with those customers, right? And somebody has to be delivering the outcomes to the customer, and that comes down to people as well.
Yeah, and you best make sure you have different people, because if they're all the exact same, like if you're all sitting around a table, it's like the Spider-Man meme, everybody looking at each other. If you don't have diversification, different types of people, different backgrounds, like things are going to get missed. And and I think that that's very important for like a healthy team, a successful team, but also as a successful vendor, right, or a buyer. On both sides of that, you got to have somebody that looks at it from a different angle, right? Or and that goes back to what Jesse was talking about when we talk about data gathering. The bias that any of us, we all bring it, right? Related to our jobs. So again, we're talking about data. I understand this, right? Like, am I changing the world? Probably not, right? But it doesn't mean that these philosophies don't apply, right? When you're dealing with something that is so incredibly dynamic, again, you need people that are knowledgeable. I'm a big believer in hiring senior, especially if you're a small company. If you're a big company, you could hire junior and train people. Like if you don't have the resources for that, you got to make sure you navigate it. But yes, a rich and diversified and different viewed group can only serve everybody's purpose here on both buy side and sell side.
I agree, absolutely. I like it. I like how we're like having a conversation about data, but we're really having a conversation about people. So I like that.
Right. That's it. That's it. None of this happens without people, right? We talk about the machines. We know that the AIs are talking to the other AIs and so on and so forth. But somewhere up in all of that, like the people do matter. Like somebody does sign off on it. Somebody has to make a decision. That is somebody's job. That is somebody's mortgage. That is, these things matter, right? They don't exist without the people. So it's important angle.
Definitely. It's so funny. It always comes down to that. You got to have your data culture to really make this all work. Great conversation. Love the topics, but we need to make sure we get to our last topic that we ask all the guests on Deconstructing Data, which is, what are some of your favorite tools in your tech stack that empower you and your team?
Yeah, I'll tell you, on a personal basis, like, I'll focus there. Probably the number one thing, like, I'm old, like how many new things am I trying out all the time? But over the course of the past, probably a couple of years, AI note takers, right? Like we use Chorus AI, which does a great job, but there are any number of other ones I'm sure, people are making use of, and I get the emails. I cannot explain like how helpful those are, right? like just the fact, like I am, long ago, I used to be on an executive team, and we had terrible communication problems, and we brought in an outside like HR like personality test firm to help us. They nailed us. They figured out what our communication problems are. And it was about how we all learn. And I am a verbal person. All I do, if I talk and I listen, I talk and I listen. It's like a verbal contract. So everything to me, that's how it locks in. Other people need things written down. Other people need to build things on their own, all that type of stuff. And that Chorus AI, I feel like, is a CYA, like a cover your ass for everybody that's involved, because not only is it, you have like a visual recording, you have an audio recording, they will, you have a text summary or a written summary and so on and so forth. So it serves a purpose for everybody. And so for me, it's definitely good to have like a written record, because I realized long ago, I had a CEO, if it wasn't written down, he did not hear it. It did not land. And no different clients or, clients or buyers or sellers or anybody on either side of it. You don't know how the other person remembers stuff. You don't know like what really resonates with them. And I am very impressed, with these tools and their ability to not only store information and interpret information, but for me, like hit the high notes for all of those different types of personalities to make sure that everybody is well aware of like what we're talking about.
Yeah,
definitely.
It's funny that we all use similar tools, but we all use different ones. I know Jesse likes Otter and I use Fireflies.
That's what I'm saying. That's the nature of it, right? Like good for Otter, good for Firefly, good for Chorus, right? Like everybody doing something different. And you know what? Like better that than we're all just using the same one, right? Like, here's Megacorp XYZ AI note taker, and that's that. So I think it's healthy, right? And they all have their different quirks. It's good.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your favorite tool in your tech stack.
Anytime. No secret there, right? But it's definitely one that, like, when it shows up, I'm like, oh yeah, that's what we talked about. It's great.
Yeah.
It's helpful.
Definitely. Well, in closing, Eli, would you like to let listeners know how they could find you after the show?
Yeah, excellent. Everybody, I'm LinkedIn is easy, right? Eli Goodman, Datos. I am, again, Datos. We are part of Semrush. I'm easy enough to track down. You could also track me down on Twitter. I'm at Los Buenos, which is just Spanish for the goods, an old high school football nickname. So either of those are probably the easiest way to find me.
Awesome. Yeah, we appreciate you joining us on the show. It's been a great conversation. I love that we tied data in with people. It's good. It's keeping it real. People are behind it all. And thank you again for being on the show.
No, my pleasure. I'd do it again. Different topics.
All right.
Awesome. Yes, definitely. Well, thank you for being here, Eli. And audience members, we would like to invite you to get powered by BDEX. So BDEX is the industry identity. So it's the industry leading identity graph, and it's trusted by many companies. If you go over to bdex.com, you can use the QR code on the screen, or if you're listening on podcasts, just go to bdex.com and you'll see a lot of the logos right on the screen that we're working with. But our comprehensive identity resolution drives results across every channel, from precision ad targeting and website visitor retargeting to direct mail campaigns, lead generation, and turning anonymous website traffic into actionable customer intelligence. So whether you're looking to enhance targeting accuracy, recovered abandoned carts, scale lead generation efforts, or maximize your performance across digital and offline channels, BDEX is delivering the most accurate identity resolution in the industry. So we eliminate those bots and the bad data that we were talking about on this episode that waste your marketing's budget, while providing the real verified audience that drive measurable ROI. So join the leading platforms that trust BDEX. You can use that QR code. We would love to talk to you. And if you're on podcast, again, just go to bdex.com and we would love to get started. Click on that Talk to an Expert button and you'll connect with our team. Other than that, this is a great episode. Thank you again, Eli, for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.